Have you ever thought about what real loneliness sounds like? Not the kind where you spend one evening alone at home. I mean the kind of loneliness so huge, so complete, that it hides behind white beaches, blue water, and perfect weather. The kind where the sound of ocean waves stops feeling peaceful and starts sounding like the heavy metal door of a giant vault closing forever. That is the real story of Australia. For decades, the world has been sold one of the most beautiful illusions on Earth. We were shown glossy travel ads filled with smiling surfers riding perfect waves, kangaroos relaxing on green fields near the shining sails of the Sydney Opera House, and happy people cooking barbecue under the hot sun with no worries, except choosing sunscreen. Australia looked like the final dream, a safe place far away from wars, economic crises, political chaos, and the endless stress of the northern world. A place where normal people could start over. A country where even an average salary felt rich. A place where owning a house with a backyard was not a fantasy, but a normal part of life. People called it the lucky country, a land blessed by nature itself. Endless resources, strong democracy, high wages, stable healthcare, clean cities, safe streets, a paradise protected by thousands of miles of ocean from the problems of the rest of the world. But what if that perfect picture is just a commercial? What if behind that polished image is something much darker, something heavy, suffocating, and impossible to ignore once you see it? Because right now, while the world still admires the Australian dream, deep cracks are already spreading under its foundation. The country that looked like freedom is slowly turning into the most advanced golden cage in modern history. The sun that was supposed to give life has become a brutal enemy, burning the land into ash. The ocean that once symbolized freedom has become a prison wall, cutting millions of people off from the rest of the world. And the wealth built on digging minerals from the ground is starting to show its true price. Australia once began as a harsh prison colony of the British Empire. Criminals were sent there in chains. Now history has made a cruel circle. Only this time, people put the chains on themselves. Mortgage debt, endless rent, surveillance laws, silent obedience. A life where stepping outside the system can destroy you financially and socially. This is no longer just an economic slowdown. This is the collapse of the Australian dream itself. Have you ever thought about what it looks like when something huge begins to die? Not from one giant disaster, not from a meteor, not from an earthquake, not from one dramatic moment that changes everything overnight, but slowly, quietly, almost silently. The kind of death that happens while everyone keeps smiling, keeps posting vacation photos, and keeps pretending everything is fine. That is exactly what is happening in Australia. People still talk about the Great Barrier Reef like it is one of the greatest natural wonders on Earth. They call it the eighth wonder of the world. They show bright pictures of colorful fish, crystal clear water, and endless coral stretching across the ocean like an underwater city built by nature itself. From space, it looks eternal, untouchable, too big to fail. But if you put on a diving mask today and swim beneath those warm blue waters, the reality hits like a punch to the chest. You do not see a living paradise. You see a graveyard, a giant white underwater cemetery where living coral has turned into dead skeletons. What was once full of color and movement now looks like a field of bones, silent, empty, lifeless. Scientists call it coral bleaching. That sounds clean and technical, almost harmless, but the truth is much uglier. It is suffocation. The ocean gets just a little warmer, sometimes only by a fraction of a degree. That tiny change is enough to push coral into extreme stress. In panic, the coral expels the tiny algae, that give it both color and food. Without them, it starves, slowly, painfully, and it dies while the world watches. The worst part is that everyone knows. The tourism industry knows. The government knows. The people in expensive offices giving speeches about environmental protection know. But pretending is more profitable than telling the truth. Every day, thousands of tourists are still taken out on luxury boats to see the reef. They are carefully guided only to the small surviving parts, while massive dead zones are quietly avoided so nobody asks uncomfortable questions. Nobody wants to ruin the holiday. Nobody wants to lose billions in tourism money. Officials stand in front of cameras and announce new reef protection plans with serious faces, promising small budgets and scientific projects that everyone knows are nowhere near enough. Trying to save the reef this way is like trying to stop a forest fire with a child's water gun. But they must keep the illusion alive, because admitting the reef is dying would mean admitting something much bigger, that Australia is losing control of its own future. And the reef is only the beginning. Come back to the surface. Take off the mask. Look at the land. You can smell it before you even understand it. Smoke, heat, burning air. Australian summers no longer feel like summer. They feel like waiting for war. People remember the black summer bushfires like a national nightmare. The sky over cities turned dark red. The sun disappeared behind smoke. Breathing outside without protection felt more dangerous than smoking packs of cigarettes every day. Millions of hectares of forest burned. Entire towns disappeared. More than 1 billion animals, kangaroos, koalas, birds, wildlife found nowhere else on Earth, were trapped in walls of fire and burned alive. This was not bad luck. This was a warning. Nature stopped being patient. And still, politicians stood in expensive suits near the ashes and defended the coal industry, the same industry helping create this disaster. Because in Australia, the system protects profit first, even when the country itself is on fire. To understand what is happening to Australia, you need to stop thinking of it as a country. Think of it as a giant luxury prison, not the kind with concrete walls, barbed wire, and guards with rifles. No, this prison is beautiful. It has white beaches, blue skies, expensive coffee, perfect highways, clean streets, and houses with swimming pools. The prisoners wear business suits, drive shiny SUVs, and spend weekends cooking barbecue under the sun. Everything looks perfect. That is what makes it so dangerous. Because the best prisons are the ones where people forget they are locked inside. Australia built exactly that. For years, people believed they were living in one of the freest countries on Earth. A relaxed place full of independent people who hated authority, loved personal freedom, and lived by simple rules. Work hard, buy a house, enjoy life. But slowly, without most people noticing, the walls started rising. And they were built from things that looked normal: mortgages, rent, debt, surveillance, isolation, fear. The first wall is geography. Australia is surrounded by ocean, and for a long time, that felt like protection. Distance meant safety. Wars happened somewhere else. Economic chaos happened somewhere else. Problems belonged to other continents. But protection became isolation. Flying to Europe or even Asia costs so much that for many people, leaving the country feels almost impossible. A ticket to the nearest major continent can cost as much as a used car. For millions of ordinary people, escape is not realistic. You are free to leave. Technically, but practically, you stay. That is how good prisons work. The second wall is housing. The Australian dream promised everyone the same simple reward: your own home. A small brick house, a backyard, children playing outside, a barbecue on weekends, security. That dream is now dead. In cities like Sydney and Melbourne, buying a home has become something close to fantasy. Prices have exploded so far beyond normal salaries that teachers, nurses, engineers, and even doctors often cannot afford basic housing. A whole generation works not to build a future, but simply to survive next month's rent. They are not citizens anymore. They are tenants in their own country. Modern serfs paying tribute to landlords who bought property 30 years ago and now rule like medieval barons. The third wall is debt. Even the people who somehow manage to buy property are not free. They belong to the bank. 30-year mortgages, 40-year mortgages, constant fear of interest rates rising. One lost job, one illness, one crisis, and everything collapses. The house does not belong to you. You belong to the house. People spend the best decades of their lives paying for walls they barely have time to live inside. That is not ownership. That is long-term financial imprisonment. The fourth wall is silence. Australia sells itself as open and democratic, but criticism has a price. Surveillance laws grow stronger. Governments collect data. Journalists are pressured. Protest becomes expensive. Speaking too loudly can cost careers, opportunities, and social acceptance. Most people learn the same lesson. Stay quiet. Do not challenge the machine. Just keep paying, working, and smiling. Even freedom becomes redefined. Freedom is no longer the right to challenge power. It becomes the right to choose which beer to drink on Friday night, which truck to finance, which streaming service to subscribe to. As long as consumption continues, the system is happy. That is not freedom, that is comfortable obedience. And maybe the cruelest wall of all is climate. The land itself is turning against the people living on it. Bushfires, floods, droughts, heat waves so brutal that roads melt and birds fall dead from trees. Fresh water becomes more expensive. Insurance companies refuse to cover homes in fire zones or flood zones. Entire neighborhoods slowly lose value because everyone knows they may not survive the next decade. Even nature is telling people this place is becoming harder to live in. But the prison stays beautiful from the outside. Tourists still come. Postcards still sell. Politicians still smile. The illusion survives. That is why this system is so powerful. Nobody feels imprisoned on day one. It happens slowly. You accept the mortgage, then the rent increase, then the surveillance law, then the impossible grocery bill, then the second job, then the decision not to have children because life is too expensive. Then one day, you wake up and realize something terrifying. You are trapped inside the most comfortable cage in modern civilization. And the worst part? Most people defend it. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting that the paradise they worked their whole lives to build was never paradise at all. It was just a prison with better weather. If you want to see where the Australian dream really collapsed, do not start with politics. Start on a quiet Saturday morning in a suburban street in Sydney. There is no violence, no riots, no dramatic headlines. Just a small old house, nothing special. One floor, faded paint, a roof that probably needs repairs, a backyard too small for the fantasy people were promised. And yet, outside that ordinary house, dozens of people stand in silence like they are waiting for Judgment Day. Young couples, teachers, nurses, engineers, people in their 30s with good jobs and exhausted faces. They are holding bank papers, mortgage approvals, saving statements, and the last pieces of hope they still have. They are not here to celebrate. They are here to fight. Because the auction is about to begin. This is modern Australia, and this is where the national myth dies. For decades, Australians were told one simple story. Work hard, stay responsible, save money, and one day you will own your own home. A house was not just property, it was dignity, stability, proof that society worked. Your parents had it. Your grandparents had it. It felt normal. Today, for millions of people, it feels impossible. The housing market has turned into a brutal arena where ordinary people compete not for luxury, but for basic survival. Real estate agents walk around smiling like priests of a very expensive religion, while desperate buyers silently calculate how much of their future they are willing to sacrifice. The answer is usually all of it. 30 years of debt, sometimes 40. People are not buying homes anymore. They are buying permission to stay in the country. Australia likes to describe itself as an equal society without hard class barriers. That idea is dead. Now there are only two classes: people who bought property decades ago, and everyone else. That is the new Australian caste system. If your parents owned land in the right suburb 30 years ago, you inherited security. If they did not, you inherited rent. It no longer matters how educated you are, how hard you work, or how useful your profession is. A young doctor can struggle more than an older landlord who bought 3 houses in the 1990s and now collects rent like passive royalty. This is not capitalism anymore. It looks much closer to feudalism. The landlord class grows richer while the working population funds their comfort. And the government helped build this system. For years, political leaders protected policies like negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts, boring technical terms that hide something very simple. The state rewards people for buying second, third, fifth, and 10th properties, while first-time buyers are pushed further out of reach. Taxes paid by young workers help subsidize wealthy investors. The poor finance the rich, and everyone pretends this is normal economic policy. Housing stopped being a place where children grow up and memories are made. It became a financial product, a chip on the table of a giant national casino. The earlier you entered the game, the more you win. If you arrived late, your role is simple: pay forever. And even for those lucky enough to buy, the nightmare often does not end. Because the construction boom created another disaster. In the race for profit, developers rushed to build shiny apartment towers of glass and concrete as fast and as cheaply as possible. Government oversight weakened, standards dropped, corners were cut. The result? Buildings that looked like luxury investments but were built like traps. People remember the panic around towers like Opal Tower in Sydney. Families who spent millions on apartments were suddenly evacuated in the middle of the night because walls were cracking, foundations were failing, and entire buildings were becoming unsafe. Imagine that moment. You spend your life, savings. You sign a mortgage that will follow you until old age. You finally believe you made it. And then you discover your home is structurally unsafe. Not a dream. A concrete coffin. Some owners watched the value of their apartments collapse to almost nothing overnight. Developers disappeared behind bankrupt companies and legal loopholes. Residents were left with impossible repair bills, endless lawsuits, and properties nobody wanted to buy. They did not purchase safety. They bought front-row tickets on a sinking ship. But even that is still better than what millions of renters face. Because Australia's rental crisis is no longer a housing problem. It is a humanitarian crisis. Vacancy rates in major cities have dropped so low that finding a basic apartment feels like applying for citizenship in another country. People line up outside rental inspections in the rain or burning heat. 50 people, sometimes 100. Everyone dressed neatly, everyone pretending not to panic, everyone holding folders with bank statements, recommendation letters, proof of employment, documents that feel less like renting and more like begging permission to exist. They get 3 minutes inside. 3 minutes to look at a small apartment with mold on the walls, broken windows, and a kitchen that has not been renovated since the early 2000s. Then comes the silent auction. Tenants secretly offer more than the listed rent, $50 more a week, 100 more, 6 months paid in advance, a full year up front if they can somehow manage it. People compete to prove who is willing to suffer more, not for luxury, just for shelter. And from this system, a terrifying new social class has appeared, the working homeless. These are not addicts or people outside society. These are nurses, paramedics, supermarket workers, government employees, people who wake up early, wear clean uniforms, work full-time jobs, and then return at night, not to a home, but to an old car parked in a dark lot, or a cold tent at the edge of the city. Because even with 2 jobs, rent is too expensive. Imagine living in one of the richest countries on earth and still sleeping in your car after finishing a hospital shift. That is not personal failure. That is total system failure. And the damage goes deeper than money. It changes how people think about life itself. Young Australians delay marriage. They delay children. Many abandon the idea completely. Not because they do not want families, but because bringing a child into a world where you might be evicted next month feels irresponsible. Why create a future you cannot protect? Birth rates fall. Depression rises. Relationships collapse under financial pressure. People spend 3 or 4 hours every day commuting from distant outer suburbs because living closer to work is financially impossible. They leave home before sunrise. They return after dark. They are alive, but barely living. This pressure cannot be measured only in graphs. You see it in tired faces on packed trains, in divorces caused by stress, in the quiet hopelessness of people who did everything society asked and still cannot reach basic stability. The social contract has been broken. People were promised that education and honest work would lead to comfort and dignity. Instead, they got student debt, stagnant wages, impossible rent, and the knowledge that half, sometimes 2/3, of their income belongs to someone else, not to build their own future, but to maintain someone else's investment portfolio. And still politicians stand at podiums promising millions of new homes by some distant future year, speaking in polished sentences they know will never become reality. Because everyone understands the truth. There are not enough builders, not enough infrastructure, not enough affordable land, not enough political courage. The machine is too profitable to stop, so the trap keeps tightening, slowly, quietly, efficiently. Sydney becomes less a city and more a giant private retirement village for aging millionaires and global corporations, surrounded by endless outer suburbs full of tired people, rising anger, and silent resentment. The creative energy leaves, the young leave, hope leaves, and what remains is a beautiful city that fewer and fewer people can actually live in. This is not a temporary crisis. This is a structural collapse. A country where housing becomes unattainable is not just expensive. It is unstable, because when people lose faith that hard work leads anywhere, they stop believing in the system itself. And once that belief dies, everything else follows. A country does not collapse only through dramatic disasters. Sometimes collapse looks much smaller. It looks like standing in a supermarket, holding a basket with bread, milk, eggs, and vegetables, staring at the total price like it must be a mistake. It looks like checking your bank account before buying basic groceries. It looks like putting things back on the shelf, quietly, without anyone noticing, because pride is often the last thing people try to protect. This is modern Australia. The crisis is no longer something you read about in financial reports or hear politicians argue about on television. It has entered kitchens, family dinners, school lunches, and sleepless nights. People feel it every single day. Australia once sold itself as the land of the strong middle class, a place where ordinary work gave ordinary people a good life. You did not need to be rich to feel secure. That promise is disappearing. Now even simple survival feels expensive. Electricity bills rise, gas bills rise, rent rises, mortgage payments rise, fuel rises, insurance rises, food rises. But salaries do not rise fast enough to keep up. People are running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up, and no matter how hard they work, they stay in the same place, or fall behind. The weekly grocery trip has become a psychological event. Parents calculate every item. Fresh fruit becomes a luxury. Good meat becomes an occasional treat. Families that once planned vacations now plan how to survive the next electricity bill. People joke about it because humor is cheaper than therapy. But underneath the jokes is fear. Real fear. The kind that sits in your chest at 2 a.m. when you are awake, staring at the ceiling, doing numbers in your head. Can we afford this month? What if the car breaks? What if one of us gets sick? What if rent goes up again? What if the landlord decides we have to leave? That fear changes people. It makes them smaller, more cautious, less hopeful. It teaches them to think only about survival. And when an entire society starts living like that, something deeper breaks. Family life begins to collapse. Young couples postpone marriage because weddings feel financially irresponsible. They postpone children because daycare costs feel impossible. Many simply decide never to have kids at all, not because they hate the idea of family, but because they cannot imagine bringing a child into a world where housing is unstable, schools are overcrowded, and one financial mistake could destroy everything. For many people, parenthood no longer feels like joy. It feels like financial suicide. This is one reason birth rates keep falling, and this creates another crisis. An aging population, fewer workers, more pressure on healthcare and pensions, a country getting older, more tired, and less able to support itself. The system feeds its own decline. Even friendships change under this pressure. People stop going out because restaurants are too expensive. Weekend trips disappear. Birthday dinners become stressful calculations. Social life becomes another luxury item. Isolation grows. People work more and see each other less. Everyone is busy. Everyone is tired. Everyone says, "Let's catch up soon." And nobody really means soon. Mental health quietly gets worse. But Australia has a dangerous habit of hiding pain behind politeness. People smile. They say they are fine. They go to work. They keep moving. But depression spreads in silence, especially among younger generations who were raised believing that education and effort would guarantee stability. They studied. They worked. They followed every rule. And they still cannot afford the life their parents considered normal. That creates a special kind of bitterness, not loud anger, something colder, disappointment, a feeling that the deal was fake from the beginning. Even the daily commute becomes part of the punishment. Because living close to work is too expensive, people are pushed farther and farther away from city centers. Western suburbs stretch endlessly. Entire lives are built around trains, highways, and exhaustion. 3 hours a day, sometimes 4. Wake up before sunrise. Return home after dark. See your children for 1 tired hour before bedtime. Repeat for decades. This is not balance. This is survival with better branding. And then there is healthcare. Australia still likes to tell itself that healthcare is safe and fair for everyone. But cracks are everywhere. Public hospitals are overloaded. Waiting lists grow longer. Finding affordable mental health support can feel impossible. General practitioners raise fees. Specialist appointments take months. Emergency rooms fill with people who have nowhere else to go. The system still functions, but it feels like it is constantly one step from breaking. People pay taxes and still feel abandoned. That frustration turns into anger, quiet anger, the most dangerous kind. Education tells the same story. Universities became businesses. Students leave with heavy debt and degrees that no longer guarantee security. Teachers burn out. Schools struggle. Childcare costs crush young families. Even the basic path, study, work, build a future, feels unstable. People start asking a terrifying question. If doing everything right still leads here, what is the point? And beneath all of this sits climate anxiety. Because everyday life is harder when summer itself feels threatening. People do not look forward to summer anymore. They prepare for it. Bushfire alerts, emergency bags, phone apps tracking fire zones, water restrictions, insurance panic. Heat waves so intense that staying outside becomes dangerous. The season that once meant beaches and freedom now feels like waiting for bad news. Parents worry about smoke. Older people worry about heat. Homeowners worry whether insurance will still cover them next year. Everyone feels the same thing. The future is becoming physically harder to live in. And maybe the cruelest part is how normal all of this starts to feel. People adapt. They stop expecting better. They lower the definition of a good life. Owning a home becomes unrealistic. Having children becomes optional. Rest becomes a privilege. Security becomes luck. Freedom becomes simply not falling behind. That is how decline wins. Not through one giant collapse, but through millions of people quietly accepting less. Less space, less time, less hope, less future. Australia still looks beautiful from the outside. The beaches are still there. The skyline still shines. Tourists still arrive and post perfect photos. But inside ordinary homes, behind closed apartment doors, in parked cars where full-time workers sleep at night, another country exists. A country of stress, postponement, and invisible exhaustion. A country where success means staying afloat. A country where people are no longer building lives, they are managing emergencies. And when everyday life becomes a permanent emergency, collapse is no longer coming. It is already here. When a country starts falling apart, people usually ask the wrong question. They ask, who made a mistake? As if this happened because of one bad law, one weak prime minister, or one unlucky economic cycle. But Australia's crisis is not an accident. It is not bad luck. It is a business model. And like every business model, it has owners. Someone benefits. Someone gets richer. Someone protects the machine while everyone else pays for it. So the real question is not what went wrong. The real question is, who profits from things staying exactly like this? Start with the mining giants. Australia is one of the richest countries on Earth in natural resources. Iron ore, coal, gas, gold, uranium, huge wealth buried under the ground. For decades, politicians sold this as a national blessing. Dig it up, ship it out, get rich. Simple. And for a while, it worked. The economy grew. Government budgets looked strong. People believed prosperity would last forever. But this created a dangerous addiction. Australia stopped building a complex economy and became something much simpler, a giant quarry. A wealthy country acting like a raw materials warehouse for the rest of the world. Instead of creating advanced industries, investing in technology, or protecting manufacturing, the country chose the fast money of extraction. Why build the future when digging holes pays more? This decision made a small group of corporations unbelievably powerful. Because when your national economy depends on coal ships leaving port, the people controlling those ships control politics too. Mining companies became more than businesses. They became a parallel government. They fund campaigns. They shape media narratives. They influence taxes. They decide which politicians survive and which ones disappear. Every leader in Canberra understands the same unwritten rule. Do not threaten mining money. If you do, your career ends. Australia has seen this before. Prime ministers who tried to introduce even modest taxes on mining superprofits were politically destroyed with shocking speed. Media attacks, party betrayal, lobby pressure, public fear campaigns. The lesson was clear for everyone watching. You can challenge voters. You cannot challenge the resource oligarchy. That is real power, not elections, not speeches, money tied directly to the ground, and the media helps protect it. Many of the country's biggest media platforms are controlled by a small number of powerful owners who repeat the same message over and over. Mining is sacred. Coal is jobs. Gas is stability. Questioning this system becomes anti-Australian, as if asking where the money goes is somehow betrayal, as if wanting hospitals, schools, and affordable energy is radical extremism. People are taught to fear reform more than corruption. And while this happens, ordinary taxpayers are forced into something almost absurd. They subsidize the very corporations extracting their national wealth. Public money helps build railways, ports, and energy infrastructure used mainly to speed up exports for private profit. Meanwhile, hospitals are overcrowded, schools struggle, roads in outer suburbs break down. The public funds private empires while being told there is not enough money for basic services. This is not mismanagement, it is organized dependency. Then there is housing, another machine designed not for living, but for profit. Banks, developers, major investors, and political elites all benefit from permanently rising property prices. If housing becomes affordable, their wealth shrinks, so affordability is treated like a threat. Policies stay broken on purpose. Negative gearing stays. Tax loopholes stay. Speculation stays. Because the people writing the rules often own multiple properties themselves. They are not trying to solve the crisis. They are protecting their own balance sheets. The same system that traps young workers in rent creates retirement plans for older investors. One generation funds another, and nobody at the top wants the music to stop. Then there is foreign dependency, especially China. This is where the whole structure becomes almost surreal. Australia publicly presents itself as a strong Western democracy closely tied to the United States. Military alliances, security partnerships, talk about defending freedom. But economically, the country became deeply dependent on one customer, China. Huge amounts of Australian exports, especially iron ore, flow directly into Chinese industry. Ships leave ports carrying the literal ground beneath Australian feet to feed construction, steel production, and industrial growth across Asia. This relationship created massive wealth. It also created strategic weakness. Because when one country buys such a large part of your economy, they gain leverage. Political independence becomes fragile. If Beijing becomes angry, entire industries panic. This already happened. Wine, barley, coal, lobsters. Suddenly blocked, restricted, punished. Farmers and exporters learned a brutal lesson. Your prosperity depends on decisions made somewhere else. Australia found itself in a strange contradiction, buying expensive American submarines to defend against a future strategic threat, while depending on that same potential rival to keep the economy alive today. Trying to protect yourself from the customer paying your mortgage. That is not strategy. That is geopolitical schizophrenia. And beneath all of this is the oldest crime of all, the destruction of land itself. Ancient indigenous sacred sites, places older than most of recorded human history, destroyed for mining expansion. Not by accident, not secretly, legally. Explosives placed inside 46,000-year-old cultural heritage because profit calculations said the ore underneath mattered more. History erased for quarterly earnings, and still the system continues. Because responsibility is carefully spread so nobody feels guilty. Politicians blame markets. Corporations blame demand. Voters blame immigrants. Landlords blame inflation. Banks blame interest rates. Everyone points somewhere else. Nobody says the simple truth. This system was designed exactly this way. Australia did not accidentally become dependent, expensive, unequal, and fragile. It was built, step by step, policy by policy, deal by deal. And the people responsible are not hidden villains in secret rooms. They are visible. They wear suits. They sit on boards. They appear on television. They smile at press conferences. They call extraction growth. They call speculation investment. They call control stability. And as long as those words keep working, the machine keeps running. The tragedy is not that people at the top are evil. It is that they are rational. They are protecting what benefits them. And unless that system becomes more painful than profitable, they will never stop. Because empires built on easy money do not reform themselves. They collapse first. Take a map of the world and look at Australia. Not as a vacation destination, not as a postcard, not as a sunny dream sold in travel ads. Look at it like a survival map. A huge island sitting alone in the southern hemisphere, far from the major centers of power, trade, and population. A giant floating lifeboat surrounded by endless ocean. For generations, Australians believed that distance was protection. Wars happened far away. Refugee crises happened far away. Economic disasters happened far away. The ocean felt like a shield. But in the future, that same distance may become the country's greatest weakness. Because isolation works only when the world is stable. And the world is no longer stable. The first future disaster is economic. Australia built too much of its prosperity on one fragile assumption, that someone else will always keep buying what it digs out of the ground, especially China. For decades, China's endless construction boom acted like a giant vacuum cleaner, pulling in Australian iron ore, coal, gas, and raw materials. Entire mining towns, state budgets, and national confidence were built on that demand. But what happens when that demand slows? What happens when the Chinese property bubble finally breaks for good? When ghost cities stop being built? When steel demand falls? And when Beijing no longer needs millions of tons of Australian ore? That day will not be a recession. It will be an identity crisis. Mining towns in Western Australia that today feel rich and untouchable could become ghost towns almost overnight. Places where truck drivers earn enormous salaries today could be filled tomorrow with empty pubs, abandoned houses, and expensive pickup trucks nobody can afford anymore. The illusion of endless wealth disappears fast when the ships stop leaving port. The Australian dollar falls. Government tax revenue collapses. Budget holes open like sinkholes. And politicians who spent decades promising permanent prosperity suddenly begin using words like necessary sacrifice and austerity. That means cuts, healthcare cuts, education cuts, welfare cuts, higher taxes for a middle class already drowning in debt. The same people who were told to trust the system will be asked to save it with money they no longer have. And there will be no easy replacement, because Australia sold much of its industrial future for short-term resource wealth. Factories closed, manufacturing died, innovation slowed. The country forgot how to build complex things because digging rocks was easier. When the resource boom weakens, there is no hidden backup plan waiting. Only the realization that the economy became a giant one-industry gamble. The second future disaster is environmental, and this one is already happening. Climate change is not a theory in Australia. It is a calendar. Every summer now feels like a countdown. Bushfires grow longer, floods grow stronger, Droughts last longer. Heat waves break records that were supposed to be impossible. Insurance companies understand this better than politicians do. They do not listen to speeches, they listen to math. And math says many homes are becoming uninsurable. Properties near forests burn. Properties near the coast flood. Properties near rivers drown. Properties inland bake. The dream house becomes a financial trap. Beautiful coastal suburbs and expensive forest communities slowly turn into future sacrifice zones, places where people still live today, but everyone quietly knows they may not survive tomorrow. When insurance disappears, value disappears. People discover their biggest investment is also their biggest liability, and climate hits basic survival too. Fresh water becomes more precious. Farming becomes less predictable. Food prices rise again. Electric grids struggle under extreme heat. Roads melt. Rail systems fail. Hospitals face seasonal pressure that feels more like wartime logistics than normal public service. At some point, the question changes from, how do we protect our lifestyle, to something much darker. Can normal life here continue at all? The third future disaster is social, because people can survive hardship. What they cannot survive forever is hopelessness. Australia's famous FIFO culture, fly-in, fly-out mining work, already shows the cost. Thousands of workers leave their families for weeks at a time, flying deep into remote mining regions to work brutal shifts in dust, heat, and isolation. They earn good money, sometimes very good money. But money is not the same as life. Children grow up without parents present. Marriages collapse. Alcohol abuse rises. Drug addiction spreads. Depression becomes normal. Suicide becomes the quiet subject nobody wants to discuss. People come home with full bank accounts and empty personal lives. They realize too late that they traded time for money, and time never comes back. Mining camps start to feel less like opportunity and more like high-tech labor colonies. Secure compounds in the desert where people become replaceable parts in an extraction machine. Work, sleep, repeat, break down, be replaced. That is not prosperity. That is controlled exhaustion. The fourth future disaster is intellectual. Countries do not decline only when money disappears. They decline when talent leaves. Australia increasingly sends its smartest people away. Scientists, engineers, researchers, creative founders, doctors. People with ambition look toward the United States, Europe, or Asia, because that is where serious laboratories, venture capital, and long-term opportunity exist. At home, too often, the system values a mining operator more than a physics professor. Resource wealth creates short-term comfort but long-term laziness. Why invest in difficult innovation when coal pays faster? Why build the future when the ground still prints money? That mindset slowly turns a developed country into something more dangerous. A rich but intellectually dependent country. A place with money but without direction. A place that consumes the future instead of creating it. And finally, there is the political future. When living standards fall, when housing becomes impossible, when climate pressure rises, and when younger generations stop believing the system works, trust begins to rot. That is when democracies become unstable, not because people suddenly become radical, because they become tired, cynical, disconnected. They stop believing voting matters. They stop believing institutions care. They stop believing tomorrow will be better than today. That emotional collapse is often more dangerous than financial collapse, because once people lose faith in fairness, they stop defending the system. Anger grows quietly for years. Then suddenly it looks like it appeared overnight. Australia still looks calm. Clean streets, good coffee, beautiful beaches, strong passports. But beneath that surface, pressure is building: economic dependency, climate instability, housing failure, emotional exhaustion, political distrust. All of it connected, all of it growing. The future danger is not one dramatic apocalypse. It is something slower and harder to fight. A country that still looks successful while becoming less livable every year. A place where the next generation inherits less freedom, less security, and less future than the one before it. That is how nations decline. Not with explosions, with silence, with normalization, with people learning to call survival success. And by the time everyone admits it, the collapse is already old news. So what is Australia, really? Is it still the lucky country? The final paradise at the edge of the world, protected by oceans and blessed by endless sunshine? Or is it something else entirely? A beautiful illusion, a polished advertisement, a golden cage so comfortable that most people do not notice the lock until it is too late. Because this is the final truth. Australia did not fail because it was poor. It failed because it was rich in the easiest possible way. It had land, it had minerals, it had distance from chaos. And instead of using that rare historical advantage to build something strong, independent, and lasting, it chose comfort. It chose short-term profit over long-term survival. It chose selling the ground beneath its feet instead of building the future above it. That is the real tragedy. This was not unavoidable. This was a decision, again and again, year after year. Governments chose mining money over industrial independence. They chose housing bubbles over affordable homes. They chose surveillance over civic trust. They chose political obedience over public courage. They chose the illusion of stability over the difficult work of real reform. And ordinary people accepted it because for a long time, the machine still produced enough comfort to make resistance feel unnecessary. As long as the beaches were beautiful, the supermarkets were full, and the mortgage payments were still possible, most people looked away. That is how decline becomes normal. Not through one giant collapse, through millions of small compromises. One law, one election, one tax break, one ignored warning, one summer, hotter than the last. One generation paying more and receiving less. Until suddenly, the system no longer feels like a country. It feels like maintenance. Just constant maintenance of a life that keeps getting smaller. Australia now stands in a dangerous place that many nations reach too late. The moment where the outside image and the inside reality are no longer the same. From the outside, it still looks perfect. Tourists still arrive. The skyline still shines. The beaches still sell postcards. Politicians still stand on international stages talking about democracy, green energy, and prosperity. But inside the country, millions of people feel something very different. They feel exhaustion. They feel debt. They feel distance. They feel the slow panic of realizing that the life they were promised may never exist. A house with a backyard, stable work, children without fear, retirement with dignity, simple things. Normal things, things that once defined the Australian dream. Now they feel like luxury goods. And maybe the most frightening part is this: the collapse is still polite. There are no burning palaces, no dramatic revolutions, no obvious final moment when everyone says, "This is where it ended." Instead, there are long commutes, rental inspections, grocery bills, bushfire alerts, silent anxiety at 3 a.m., families deciding they cannot afford children, workers sleeping in cars, young professionals leaving the country, old people sitting in expensive homes, rich on paper and terrified of what comes next. It is a quiet apocalypse, the kind that happens while everyone keeps going to work. History is cruel to nations that confuse luck with wisdom. Australia believed geography would protect it forever. It believed resource wealth was the same thing as strength. It believed democracy could survive without constant defense. It believed freedom was automatic. History never forgives that kind of arrogance, because freedom is not barbecue on a sunny weekend. Freedom is not choosing between brands in a supermarket. Freedom is not owning a large truck financed by lifelong debt. Freedom is fragile. It requires sacrifice, responsibility, attention, and the courage to challenge systems that become too comfortable to question. Australia forgot that. It mistook comfort for liberty, consumption for happiness, silence for peace. Now the bill has arrived, and it is enormous. Climate demands payment. Housing demands payment. Economic dependency demands payment. Social trust demands payment. And unlike debt, this bill cannot be refinanced forever. At some point, the country must decide what it actually wants to be: a sovereign nation, or a very expensive resource colony with good weather, a democracy, or a smiling, efficient management system for controlled decline, a home, or a luxury waiting room for collapse. That decision cannot be delayed forever, because time is no longer neutral. Every year of inaction makes the future smaller. Every ignored warning makes the cost higher. Every comfortable lie makes the truth more violent when it finally arrives. The beaches are still golden, but now they look less like paradise and more like an hourglass. The sand is running out, and somewhere beneath the bright sun, under the sound of ocean waves and the smell of weekend barbecue, an entire nation is beginning to understand a terrifying possibility. Maybe the lucky country was never lucky at all. Maybe it was simply living on borrowed time,